I've used Obsidian every day for 2 whole years, and after 800 notes, these are the 5 most important lessons that I learned the hard way. Lessons I hope you can consider in your own journey to avoid stress, to avoid getting stuck, and to build a happy life of learning. I'll cover some of the trickiest parts of Obsidian, like the organization, the tags, and even knowing what to write about in the first place. I have never made a video like this, so there's going to be lots to talk about. My first point is especially important to beginners, and it might even be shocking to hear. Start writing first and figure out the system later. And trust me, this will make sense. Obsidian is as simple as you want it to be. You can start with just a few folders and some blank notes, and that's enough. Or you can throw in the plugins, the workflows, the custom code, all that crap. And that stuff's fine because it's how you adapt the system to your needs. The real problem is when you let it stress you out before you've even started any writing. I don't know if it's some hint of autism or something, but early on I was obsessed with finding this perfect structure because I was afraid of anything less than that, the so-called suboptimal. I spent months and months researching before I even put a single word down. And, there's 2 big problems with that. One, I was procrastinating, which is pretty shit by itself. And second, I had no experience with this kind of note-taking, so all of this advice I was reading and watching had no foundation in reality. When I finally got going, I started to realize I don't use half these features. I don't need them. And it's just weighing me down. And you can't really blame yourself when that happens because it's easy to fall into a trap of YouTube tutorials and articles. And what happens is you end up building someone else's perfect system and not your own. And after a few months of struggle, I just said, okay, you know what? I'll use some of what I learned, but I'm also just going to start. I'm going to figure things out. I'm going to see what I need along the way and then change it as I go. It's like learning to play an instrument. You don't learn every single technique before you learn a single song. You learn techniques when you need them to play new songs. This means anything I do end up adding to Obsidian actually has intent behind it. And it's not based on this blind hope that it could be useful in the future. For example, in my case, I started out with 2 plugins. And that stayed the same for over a year. But then eventually I felt, okay, I like to categorize things in my life. It makes me happy. So I'm going to find a plugin to make these nice tables. And there we go. I solved the problem when it came, not before it even existed. Just a quick disclaimer that these tips apply to my system and to my goals, which are to learn more, to improve my writing, and to build a bank of useful notes that I can use for future projects. Now I get that's just me. And we all have unique goals and different approaches to Obsidian and, reasons we use it. I try to account for that a bit, but it won't be perfect, so you just have to know it. And that's all. My second tip is to edit old notes more often and sometimes even delete them. And you might think, that sounds dumb. Why would we get rid of our hard work? But trust me, there are good reasons. Over the months and the years, as you write, you learn, you figure out what interests you, your mind changes. In other words, you grow as a person. And that means what you wrote in a note maybe a year ago is no longer relevant, it's no longer interesting, or maybe it's not up to your current standard in terms of the writing. I can go through my vault today and find notes that make me think, am I stupid? Why would I even bother writing this? What was the goal here? Some notes are pointless or redundant, and I make the hard choice to just delete them, just to keep things clean and to really stress that quality over quantity. And other notes do have interesting ideas, but maybe the writing is sloppy. Maybe I didn't write that much, maybe my argumentation was bad, or maybe it's just bad writing and it made me cringe, which happens a lot, by the way. And in that case, it's always good to refresh the notes and to give them a new life. It's far too easy to get caught up in making new notes all the time, but then neglecting the old ones and letting them age badly. Because remember, this is your vault for life. Every single note you create has timeless value. So it only makes sense to give things a spring cleaning now and then and keep them useful and fresh. Now, all of this advice matters very little unless you can stay focused. And even though I'm pretty consistent, I do have those moments where I'm hungry for dopamine and I just cannot focus on the writing. Recently, I found a solution to that in Rise, who are sponsoring this video. Rise is a productivity assistant that lets you see how you spend your time. And it also helps you improve your focus patterns. Once you boot up your PC, Rise automatically starts tracking what you're doing, and it neatly categorizes that into this pie chart and calendar view. And after each day, week, and month, you also get a personal email report of your work patterns, which gives you clarity in just a few seconds. I'm a big believer in tracking the things that you want to improve, like I do with my word count in my writing, for example. And this is because it gives you a sense of accountability and it encourages you to be more mindful over how you spend it and also how you can improve it. And what I enjoy the most with Rise is this little widget here, which lets you create focus sessions to keep you zoned in, and even breaks too, which are just as important. Rise also gives you a much needed slap on the cheek when it feels you're getting distracted. And after a few weeks of using it now, that is the tough love I needed. Also, many other apps like this tend to be clunky and honestly a bit ugly, and I can appreciate how Rise keeps it neat and subdued. It's a beautifully clean UI with no extra faff that gets in the way. To check it out for yourself, you can click the link in the description. And if you use code Odysseus, you get 25% off of any purchase. And if you need more time to explore the app, that's fine too, because the discount remains active for up to 3 months after you first use it. So do check it out. I hope you enjoy and thank you to Rise. Number 3 is to organize as you go, not afterwards. After some practice, you'll start to get an idea of what works and what doesn't, and maybe how you want to structure your writing. That's good, but even then you can screw yourself over if you're not careful. When I wrote new notes, I'd often be too lazy to properly tag them or to sort them out in an index. And I thought, yeah, I'll do it later. But later never came. And I always think it's like a pile of dirty dishes in the sink. Like, that's not getting any smaller, mate. You have to figure it out and do something about it. To get around that future headache, I try and be more careful now in how I organize things. I put a little more thought into the tags. I try and link things more accurately. And if there is an index, I try and add as I go, not just later. Yes, it costs a little bit more time and effort, I know, but your future self will be happy and it will be worth it. Oh, and by the way, indexes come up next, so don't worry about that. But just before that, I want to mention that I have a newsletter. It's totally free to sign up down below, and I promise you it's not spammy, because I hate that as well. Number 4 is to use sub-indexes, and I promise you it's simpler than it sounds, and it saved me from a lot of confusion and redundancy. But first, some background. I use tags to sort my notes into topics. So any note about mortality, for example, has that tag, which collects everything together. When the discussion gets large enough and I feel it's necessary, I make an index. This is like a contents page, where you have a bird's eye view over everything in that topic, which keeps it all organized, of course. But there was a dilemma with that which really pissed me off, and I want you to avoid it. And of course, it's easy to show you with an example. I'm interested in writing. Not just writing in general, but fiction writing, copywriting, editing, all of these different branches of it. Now, let's say I make a note on how to edit your landing page for clarity. Well, I run into a problem. This note can have 3 overlapping tags: writing, editing, and copywriting. That also means any note on copywriting will also have the more general tag of just writing. It gets messy, it gets redundant, and it just blurs everything together. So instead, I split up my major indexes into sub-indexes, like in my writing one over here. Now I don't need to put the writing tag on every single note about writing, since I know they are already connected through the sub-indexes. You can see how none of my copywriting notes have the writing tag, because I know that copywriting is already nestled under writing as a sub-index. And you might think, well, in that case, when would you use the broadest index? Like just writing. I save that for the most general notes, which don't really apply to any specific sub-index. And these tend to be the basics, the fundamentals, the things which apply everywhere. I know this is a bit more technical and wordy than the others, so if anything isn't making sense, please talk to me in the comments, send me an email. I'll do my best to get back to you. I wish I took this next piece of advice to heart much earlier on, because it stumped me for ages. What do we write about? How much? How little? What's worth writing about? You might be like me, where you end up writing way too much because you feel like an information hoarder. But then you might swing too far the other way and you don't write enough. And you leave all these interesting ideas behind and this sense of FOMO builds up. Well, I'll be straight up and admit that I don't have it perfect yet. It still haunts me at night. But I do have a precious maxim that I think you would like. If it doesn't excite, do not write. Sometimes I force myself to write down ideas or insights that I don't truly care about. And I end up with all of these bullshit notes that don't end up really saying anything. In other words, it was a cope, just to feel productive. The solution, which is this maxim, is to be stricter on what you write by relying on your emotion. Sometimes you read things that physically make you perk up and pay more attention. And those are the ideas you're looking out for. Those are the ones that stick out, the ones that you'll remember, the ones that change how you see the world. If you struggle with writing too much or maybe too little, then these are the ideas I'd focus on. And with the rest, I would maybe tone it down or at least overlook temporarily. Because yes, while it might be good and interesting, it's also great to keep your vault focused and really high quality. And of course, you can always come back and reread things to make time for those other ideas. Plus, an extra little benefit is for less effort, you get more in return, because you're really forced to curate things instead of just hoard them. And I know that because I was a hoarder and I still am in a way. I focus a lot on squeezing every little bit of insight out of a book before I can move on. And it's good in some senses, bad in a lot of senses, but in this way you keep things clear and focused and you keep your notes valuable. Good note taking should not feel like a drag. That was a lot to take in. And if you want to discover more on how I use Obsidian, then I'd recommend one of these videos on the screen now. And of course, never hesitate to comment or to shoot me an email. I'll do my best to respond. It will take a while sometimes, but I do try my best, seriously. And of course, thank you so much for watching. I'm really grateful for it.